Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit. And also welcome to our 100th live stream. It's a bit of a milestone for us. So getting started here. Back in the 1970s, we had two major gas shortage events, each caused by issues in the Middle East. Now, if you lived through those times, you might recall waiting in gas lines, hoping they wouldn't run out of gas before you got to the pump. Today, we're experiencing a fuel issue again, based on events in the Middle East. The difference, though, is that we have plenty of gas. The problem is the cost. Now, what President Trump is doing could eventually solve both of these problems. OPEC, which is a major player in the cost structuring of fuel, is fracturing, and Iran is crumbling. We may soon be in a global system which has plenty of gas and reasonable prices. Now, having lived through both of these global circumstances, I will tell you that I'm far more comfortable paying a little extra for fuel for a short period of time rather than wondering if I was going to be able to fill my tank at all. So we need to continue to pray for peace in the Middle East, for our president's ability to work through these issues, because peace in the Middle East will create peace throughout the world. So with that, welcome Mike Levine.
Thanks for having me on again, Chuck. This is great, our 100th episode. And I just want to say one thing, Chuck. When you say we have to pray for peace in the Middle East, I'm praying for victory in the Middle East.
Well, I think
that's what I'm talking about.
I think that's...
And of course, OPEC, oil producing, exporting countries, right? And the United Arab Emirates withdrew from OPEC. And that's what you're talking about with OPEC crumbling, which is a very good sign that we're about to win, as we've got Iran choked off from, well, of course, Iran can be supplied from the other side of the country opposite the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran's not in real great shape today, Chuck. And I mean, our president has them pretty snookered, I would venture to say. And now you've even got China complaining about it.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, Mike. The idea that this president, in one strategic event, has put us in a situation where not too long from now, we could have both plenty of gas and reasonable prices for a long, long time. And I tell you what, that is a victory.
Chuck, I was talking to a friend of mine last night. Who's a Trump hater.
Yeah.
Right? And I told her that we were going to change the name of the Strait of Hormuz to the Strait of Trump.
Yeah, right.
And even she got a kick out of that.
Yeah, right. Well, I think
she really liked that. She's a Trump hater.
And
she loved it.
I think President Trump has already floated that idea.
No, he put out a graphic and everything, yeah. Right? I mean, he did the whole thing. So he did that that was a strategy of war, Chuck, to get under the Iranian leadership's skin.
Yeah, right.
When they have to look at a meme online that says Strait of Trump, trust me, those theocrats, that really bothers them, right? This is the whatever the anti-Mohammed guy. Here's the anti-Mohammed. Putting his name on the. Which is, oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, always remember about the Strait of Hormuz, that is international water. And the Iranians have no right to interfere with maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz under any circumstances. That is a crime under international law. So if they're messing around with cargo ships running through the Strait of Hormuz, they're in the violation of international law. So keep that in mind as you monitor what's going on over there. But I personally believe, Chuck, that if Donald Trump does nothing more than keep the blockade in place, then you will starve the Iranians out. I mean, that's just the way it's going to go if you don't do anything else. So we'll see. Obviously, I think everybody who's following this understands that, Trump is out there again saying that we're very close to having a deal with Iran and blah, blah, blah. So we, we released the program that the military was assisting those cargo ships from getting through the strait and all that, because we're going to go back to the negotiating table on this little one pager that the United States and Iran is going to agree to, but I personally don't see that happening. Um, Nuclear is off the table. Iran refuses to talk about relinquishing their nuclear ambitions and turning over their uranium. Their so I don't see an agreement happening. I think eventually, and of course Donald Trump is getting more aggressive, saying that he needs to be involved in selecting the replacement leadership of the regime over there. So I think that this is going to continue. And of course, don't forget that Trump's getting a lot of pressure from Congress because after 60 days, you've got to go to Congress to the War Declarations Act. And of course, so that's why they canceled Epic Fury. They just ran out of time on Epic Fury. So anyway, let's just get back to what we're going to talk about today, Chuck.
Today, okay, all right. Well, we are kind of wondering if we couldn't possibly get ahead of things for 2027, and we were talking about the idea that committee week is coming up later in the year, and how do we prepare for 2026 in preparation for the 2027 legislative session? You want to get us kicked off with that?
Yes, I do. So, to all of my grassroots brothers and sisters out there, the way to start is to come up with your own list of legislative priorities. If you don't know what's important to you, it's impossible for your legislator to make you happy. This is what we're doing, ladies and gentlemen. The grassroots is a reactive body. We are not proactive in most cases. I'm not going to say 100% because there are cases in which grassroots organizations are proactive, but they are the exception, not the rule. So I challenge everyone who is watching this broadcast to, have a little study time and just go through your brain. What happens to me, Chuck, is I ask, what is required in order to have a functional and civil society? And then that leads me to, well, of course, people have to have housing. People have to have utilities, electricity, water. People have to be able to get groceries. People have to be able to get back and forth to work. And that is how I frame all of my priorities. It's over the how does a middle class family um, pay for their existence in our society, which is also, you can refer to it as our economic model. And that's how I begin um, prioritizing what I believe we should be doing in the next legislative session. But of course, that also gets into campaign finance. If you have, no matter what we want, if we don't have the right leaders in place, then we'll never get it because the leaders are bought and paid for by developers, let's just say, as we referred to in our last episode. So if our leaders are bought and paid for by a very small number of people whose interests may not align with our interests, well, then that makes, having a peaceful civil society much more difficult. But that's what we have to do. And so the next step becomes how do you prevent that from happening? And that's what brings us always back to election reform, Chuck. I mean, if we can't elect, if the population, the citizens of this state do not have the apparatus at their disposal to get a clean vote, and I'm saying to you, until we analyze the voting machines, we're not going to ever know for sure. And of course, now we see our buddy Evan Power out there advertising for people to get, he's running for Congress in Congressional District 2. And, he's out there telling people to order your mail-in ballot because when the election law was rewritten, you have to request a mail-in ballot in every election cycle. So that means that the chairman of the Republican Party of Florida, who's running for Congress in CD2, is out telling people to request your mail-in ballot, request your mail-in ballot. Well, it sounds to me like Evan Power realizes that there's something about that mail-in vote that makes it really difficult to win if you don't win in the mail-in vote. And I have a real problem with that, Chuck.
Yeah, well, we do have some interesting things here. You've put together. You're one who likes to write things down. What do you say if it isn't written down, or what is written down comes to pass? Something along those lines. Um,
Yeah,
you,
what's written down comes to pass. That's true.
I'm going to throw up on the screen your mission statement because you basically are talking about um, having a plan, and I didn't know if you want to help us run through some of this. Your mission statement is to deliver a state of Florida that median household income families can afford to live in. And you've got some strategies here. You want to work us through a couple of these?
Sure. Well, it's so interesting, right? Because I wrote this a couple of weeks ago, and the number one thing on my list is ethics in government. Well, take a look at our previous episode where we've got developers over in Sarasota County bankrolling Byron Donalds right now, just like they bankrolled Ron DeSantis and just like they bankrolled Rick Scott before him. So I don't see a lot of change on the horizon as it relates to ethics in government. And I'm just going to say to you and the audience and whoever else would like to watch this video someday that when politicians' first concern is their own political destiny, then this system will never work. The people's best interests have to supersede the interests of our politicians. And that goes from city council all the way to the White House, Chuck Benoit. What do you think?
Well, basically, that's my definition of republic. You have to, in our nation anyway, government for the people. Now, you can't argue with the fact that these politicians are part of the people. But you can argue that they're not governing for the people. If they're governing for special interests or personal interests, they are not governing like a Republican. And I think that's the big concern. Here in Florida, as both you and I have learned in the past, all the Republicans want to know is, are you a Republican? They don't even care what your what your position is. They just want to know if you're a Republican. They'll vote for you. Well, and that doesn't totally work in primaries, which we're about to enter into. How do we figure out how to get these people, in particular Republicans, concerned enough about what these politicians are standing on to make a clear discernment during the primary session?
Chuck, I'm telling you, until the grassroots harnesses the ability to establish the word ubiquitous is stuck in my mind, so I guess I might as well get it out on the table there. But until we can use the tech, as I've been saying for the last couple of years, until we master the technology that's required in order to send messaging into every voting household in the state of Florida, we are going to continue to lose, Chuck. That's just the way it is. Run for office someday, and then go out and try to get grassroots activists to donate to your campaign. And you're just not going to raise enough money to compete. I mean, Byron Donalds and his crew raised $3.1 million in one night in Sarasota County. Granted, on a statewide level, and I'll tell you something, in these Florida House districts, there is no money in these races until you bring special interests into it. And the only time special interests donate in House races is when they're threatened. So, for example, if you've got a state rep that's performing for special interest and some grassroots challenger steps up, believe me, money's going to pour into that campaign to defeat this grassroots challenger who may not be as cooperative with special interests as the opponent, as the grassroots candidate's opponent, whether it's an incumbent or not. So that's what happens. These guys, it's like it's like a fireman. They put the water hose where the fire is, and you get into a hotly contested Florida House race, that could be a $50,000 race, and all of a sudden that turns into a $200,000 race or even more once this special interest realize they're being challenged by somebody who may not be as cooperative as someone else, Chuck. So that's a really big deal. This campaign finance piece of the puzzle is a really big deal, Chuck.
Here we go. So, under strategies, I'm going to pop this back up here, right kind of in the middle of things here. Number 3, implement nations and actions, good governance guarantee, which is composed of NIA policies that implement the audits, affidavits, and transparencies program. Now, we've talked about that before, Mike. Why don't you give us a reminder?
Again, this is Maria Zach's program with Nations in Action. And, the fact is, Chuck, like, for example, you know, I just found, like, for example, Anthony Sabatini made it public that our tax collector, David Jordan, went to the county commissioners asking the Lake County Board of County Commissioners to lease a building that he owns um, so that he could cover the cost of owning the building, right? I mean, so that's a problem. Taylor Yarkowski owns a building in Claremont that the state of Florida leases, and he offices in that building, and the state of Florida picks up the tab. So he's selling product to the state of Florida, and it enriches him personally. So at the end of the day, government. This is two local examples that we have of, and it's not, it's not unusual. So again, before Taylor Yarkowski leased his own building to the state of Florida, his buddy, who's a friend of mine, Brett Jones, had Taylor Yarkowski's office designated as his law firm, 700 Almond Avenue in Claremont, to receive rent payments from the state of Florida. So until you start auditing, so audits, affidavits, transparency, until you get way up into the books in every city and every county, but then these people will take advantage of the situation, and they'll talk about it just pure capitalism. Huh? Why wouldn't I do that if I can own a building and set up my state house office there or my tax collector's office there and rent the building to the state of Florida to cover my mortgage payment or just turn into positive cash flow? I mean, that's just a great business decision, right? If you can get that done. But it's also that's what we're dealing with. So we have to have audits. Unfortunately, we can't trust our elected officials to manage our budgets with integrity. Point number one. Affidavits. The next step becomes that Maria believes that every employee of government, every government employee, should sign an affidavit every single time they pick up a paycheck stating that they haven't seen anything illegal or unethical going on in their department. And, that's a pretty heavy lift right there. That every time a government employee picks up a paycheck, that they're going to sign an affidavit stating that they did not see anything unethical or illegal happening in their workspace. That is a pretty interesting thing. But that's what Maria is advocating for, and maybe that would work, and maybe it wouldn't. I think the employee would eventually become desensitized, and they would sign the affidavit even though they did in fact see unethical and illegal behavior going on in their offices. Because let's face it, unethical and illegal behavior goes on in most offices, private sector or not. And the next piece of it becomes transparency. And that would be that basically all of our documents, all of our public records and documents and everything should just be online. And chief financial officer Jeff Atwater actually did that when he was the chief financial officer of the state of Florida. He had all of the public contracts online. You could search anything online and figure out, what road construction companies were getting paid, and all public should have as much transparency as we can possibly provide, and the government should have no secrets from the citizens of this state, Chuck. So, audits, affidavits, transparency. There you go. I covered it.
Okay. So Next on your list, I'll pop it up here, is education. And the number one position here you have is teaching children and their families that Judeo-Christian values are the underpinning of America's legacy. You want to give us a little bit of information on that, Mike?
That's just true, Chuck. I mean, and I certainly am preaching to the choir, when I'm talking to you. But it's honestly and truly, faith is the cornerstone of all of our success in life. And I watch. We all do. But anyway, that's where my head is. I believe that faith and um, and our willingness to walk out our faith in our life determines the quality of our life. And that doesn't, government does not override that, does not bypass that, or any degree. And we've debated many people on the subject of whether Judeo-Christian values are the foundation of our country. I think that we make a pretty good case for the argument that it is. And in America, without foundational belief and without the foundational concept of Judeo-Christian values, we'll never function as a peaceful civil society, in my estimation, Chuck. And it goes back to everything we've already said in this broadcast so far. So it goes back to, I was talking to an elite public official one day about faith. Actually, it was right after the October 7th attacks in Israel. The Board of County Commissioners had a pro-Israel rally in front of the administration building in Tiberias. And I was talking to one of our constitutional officers at the time, and the constitutional officer said, "Well, Mike, you've got to deal with the secular aspects associated with running government." To my response was, "No, you don't. As a matter of fact, that is a definition of walking out your faith. When you're willing to stand in your faith against all else, now you're doing what God intended you to do." And my point to that particular elected official is there were about 12 speakers that day, and two of them were Jewish rabbis. And you could add up everything that everybody said, and the two Jewish rabbis were by far the most compelling speakers of the day. They were passionate about the subject. They were informed about the implications, and they were the most moving speakers by far. So my point would be, and of course, as far as I'm concerned, Chuck, that Christianity is built on Judaism. Without Judaism, in my opinion, there would be no Christianity. And Jesus referred back to the books of Moses and the prophets in the Old Testament of the Bible, which is the Tanakh, to Jewish people on a regular basis. So, this hence Judeo-Christian values. I believe that that's what our country is built on. And when we deviate away from Judeo-Christian values, bad news, rough water is ahead, stormy water is ahead, Chuck. So that would be my response to your question and my point about the importance of teaching Judeo-Christian values to our children, Chuck.
Yeah, so I've highlighted your point number 3 under that, which is teaching children and their parents that there is a good life ahead for those who work hard and play by the rules. Mike, that is the Judeo-Christian ethic when it comes to work. And it's diametrically opposed to what we're getting through the Democrat Party and the Mamdanis of the world, who are basically saying that all we have to do is live off of the wealth of the rich. And we don't really have to create wealth. And I might just add to that, the main reason the Democrat Party needs to import poor people, public manages to allow those poor people to get a little bit more comfortable and a little more wealthy. So they keep running out of poor people. They've got to import them. So,
Well, I'm telling you something, Chuck. Here's my response to that. Okay, because I'm going to tell you something, Chuck. Um, I have several different examples running through my brain right now, but living off of other people worked. Well, again, I guess Margaret Thatcher said it right. Eventually you run out of other people's money, right? So that's a pretty interesting point. But at the end of the day, I'm saying to you, and just like I hate. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I think about my own children, right? My children are very prosperous, right? And I continuously encourage my children to teach my grandchildren um, work ethic. But long story short, if you're sailing along in a stress-free life, living off other people's money, when diversity hits, you're going to be totally unprepared to deal with it. So, for example, we have this war, this whatever you call it, conflict going on in Iran. So let's assume for a moment that American Marines were to go into Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or Qatar, write their citizens checks off of their oil revenue. I have a pretty uh, clear understanding that those people are not going to be able to defend themselves against the United States Marines. They've never had a fight in their life. They have their, avocado toast in the morning off of the government. They didn't do anything to earn their avocado toast. They didn't build they didn't build a energy plant with their own two hands. They never worked on their car. They never fixed their own plumbing. They never did any of that kind of stuff. So when adversity comes, you're going to be anybody that lives off other people's resources is going to find themselves incapable of surviving in tough times. So the best thing they can hope for is that they never experience tough times. And if that happens, you're lucky. You ran your whatever your lifespan is, you had a good run and you didn't have to face difficult times. But over history, your children, grandchildren, your posterity are going to face difficult times at some point. And if we do not learn to create things, to build things, then our bloodline will not learn to do it either, because they're going to model, whether they agree or not, they're going to model the behavior of their ancestors to some degree, and eventually it's going to go bad for us. And that's what happens over generations, Chuck. So I would say to you that we must. But here's the last point I'll make on that subject is, Chuck, that too many Americans, I'm going to say more than 50% of Americans, don't believe, good, solid, hardworking Americans do not believe that there's any real benefit to them coming from the government that they pay for. And that's a real problem, Chuck. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
well, let's finish up on our last couple of minutes. The idea of individual legislative priorities. By individual, I mean each of us out here floating around in Lake County and Central Florida and beyond. What is it that we're looking for? And we kind of floated the idea of asking our viewers to let us know what their legislative priorities are, and even possibly want to come on and discuss them on our broadcast. So, do you want to kind of open that invitation, and while you're at it, just kind of bring us to a close?
Okay, super. So at the end of the day, for this Republican form of government to work, citizens have to be engaged. That's just the way it is. The government has way too much money in its disposal, to um, to not have people want to take advantage of those large pools of money. Have to closely watch what's going on in their government. That's why you and I do what we do, Chuck Benoit. So in the event that people aren't willing to engage in their government, then they will be governed by tyrants. As you close out every one of these broadcasts, Chuck, So the point is, if we're not thinking about, um, what determines our value proposition, what do we want government to do for us, and what is beyond the scope of government in this country where limited government is the best government. If our viewers and our grassroots brothers and sisters can't say this is what the government is doing right and this is what the government is doing wrong based on their own value proposition, then the government is going to do what it wants to do. So I'm saying that all citizens of this great country, and for me, I'm most concerned about citizens of this state and, of course, this county, but we all should have an opinion. So when we come to these meetings, there should be debates so that we can all test our own thought processes among our neighbors, and that's how we refine the that's how we refine the public dialogue and actually craft government that works for what I like to refer to. Because if the median household income family thrives in the economy that we create, then the rest of the economy will do well also. Of course, and then you have to underpin it with Judeo-Christian values, which is just the nature of the universe. And if you don't do that, you're going to fail. So those are the 2 points, Chuck. So that's what I would have to say. People must engage. People must have their own set of legislative priorities going into legislative session. And then we have to we have to analyze all of our various different opinions that we bring to the table in order to actually set our legislative priorities, after considering the aggregate, all of our concerns, Chuck Benoit.
Well, thank you, Mike Levine, and thank you all for tuning in to our twice at Restore Our Rep 76, or check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic ROAR. Please like and share the program, and remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. Until next time, God bless you, God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.